Paul Brandeis Raushenbush is an ordained Baptist minister, not Southern Baptist like my mama, but American Baptist, and a denomination long committed to American pluralism, separation of church and state, and social issues. Paul has a gift for travel. I don't know how you travel so much, but also addressing multiple communities and audiences. He is able to contextualize his presentations and discussions depending on the community he is with. I've heard several of his presentations, been deeply moved. He is the CEO and president of Interfaith Alliance. The former president, I believe, was Jack Moline. Is that correct? Rabbi in this area. And Paul has inherited this role and embraced it with vigor and brought the interfaith message to bear on the issues of our time. He's a graduate of Macalester, which I did not know. I lived in Minnesota for a long time, and of Union Theological Seminary in New York. He has had many roles in chaplaincy and the interfaith work, including roles at Princeton University, and senior vice president at Auburn Seminary in New York. He was executive director of the religion side, HuffPost religion, with the Huffington Post, and editor of BeliefNet. The gifts that Paul brings come in part from a legacy that would intimidate me. But it's Brandeis being Supreme Court Justice and being the great-grandson, and Walter Raushenbush, his great-grandfather, one of the leading founders of the social gospel movement in the United States. But Paul has embraced this legacy with the energy of continuing it and deepening it, and we are very fortunate to have him. I heard a testimony from one of his former students just this morning, who she's now a Presbyterian pastor, but she was motivated by Paul's engagement with her at Princeton to not only take faith seriously and interfaith engagement seriously, but also consider taking on a religious vocation in the Protestant world that usually means becoming an educator or a pastor. And indeed, that's what she did, and she says Paul was the reason she went into this vocation. So let us give a round of applause to our speaker, Paul.
Well, let me say it is. Can you all hear me? Am I good?
Yes.
Okay, and I get emphatic, so I think we're going to be good. All right. Let me say it is an honor to be here at Washington.
Theological.
Okay. What did you want me to do? Oh no, I have it. Okay. I knew the words. I knew where I was. Theological Consortium, and to deliver this lecture. And thank you so much, Diane, and thank you, Larry, for inviting me. It's a great honor, and it's especially for me so important to be with you all. Because the 3 years, and I tell anyone this, the 3 years I spent in seminary doing my own theological formation were the hardest thing I ever did, and the most important for forming me who I am today. And so what you're charged with, and the opportunity of being in community with one another, thinking about what you're charged with, is, I think, one of the most profound responsibilities in America today. Being greetings from Interfaith Alliance, all of our, my entire staff and our affiliates who are all across the country, and the thousands who participate in our mission, which is summed up in our tagline, Achieving Democracy Together. We believe that faith communities have an important, in fact, necessary role in achieving our democracy together. And I come today as as civic leader, an interfaith leader, but also as a pastor who is thinking not only of those of us in this room, but the wider American democracy project, and thinking about what it will take for those of us who care about our democracy to show up right now. And to be perfectly honest, I come today with a warning about the state of our democracy. And I come with a challenge to religion. And those of us who either through theological education, clergy leadership, or civic engagement participate in the American project through our religious communities. As Americans and as religious people, we are facing the greatest threat and test of our generation. America is arriving at our 250th anniversary just as democracy faces an uncertain future under the threat of rising authoritarianism. We are in a pivotal moment, and what you and I and others of diverse faiths and beliefs do in the next months will determine the future of the project that is America. While our moment is unique, it is not without precedent. Throughout these last 250 years of American history, religious people and communities have faced great tests that reveal how they chose to interpret and exercise the moral character of the faith traditions of which we are a part. Profound societal challenges, such as the horror of slavery, radical economic injustice, the struggle for equality and civil rights for all, just to name a few, have forced a decision on how people of faith will leverage the power of their religious and spiritual traditions. If we are clear-eyed, we know that in all of these times there were religious leaders and faithful congregants acting as cheerleaders for the worst angels of our republic. To use just one example, the horror of slavery was given sacred sanction by generations of white Christian pastors preaching from the Bible. The largest Protestant denomination today, the Southern Baptist Convention, I'm not just picking on them, by the way, it was a lot of conventions, but I am going to name them, was in fact created specifically so that slave owners could continue to claim their faith while treating their fellow humans as chattel. And I could spend my entire time here listing the many times that American religion has failed the moral test of the moment. But today, I want to remind us that that is not the only story. Fortunately, our history is rich with the examples of religious people passing the test of their time by accessing the courage of their faith, overcoming legal, cultural, and political realities to show up and speak out and organize and mobilize to move our country forward ever closer to the promise of liberty and justice for all. My prayer is that we too might pass the test and take our place in that trajectory. But our success is by no means certain. We are facing our own test. The test is not theoretical or about the future. It is real, and it is about now, and it is about all of us. It will require courage, and nobody is going to save us but us. Here is what I see as I look from the watchtower. In just the first year of the Trump administration, our nation has made radical moves towards authoritarianism. Norms that have broadly been understood as foundational to keeping democracy intact have been eroded. Public institutions such as the Department of Education, USAID, Veteran Affairs, FEMA, and the State Department have been decimated. Programs such as Medicaid and SNAP have been gutted to provide tax breaks to the billionaires. Thousands of individuals who were tried and found guilty of attacking our Capitol to undermine the peaceful passing of power, many of them violently, were pardoned and are now on the street. We have a rapidly expanding police force, abducting people off the street without due process, while libraries and librarians are being attacked and universities are being threatened and museums censored. Honest histories of diverse communities that collectively tell the full story of our country are being erased, providing comfort and cover for the establishment of a whitewashed story that serves the aims of a political power grab. Hate crimes against Black people, Jews, and Muslims have skyrocketed, while women's reproductive health and safety are undermined. And some are even questioning the right of women to vote. The rights of trans people to simply live and the rights of same-sex couples to simply love are being violently eroded and used as political pawns. Freedom of speech is being suppressed, with the president exerting pressure to even get comedians who bruise his ego off the air. Meanwhile, the military is being deployed against the American people, occupying American cities with the intent to subdue, intimidate, and normalize the militarization of our nation, with the president creating a faux emergency pretext in his dangerous address to the stone-faced generals, saying, "We're under invasion from within." No different than a foreign enemy. It's a war from within. Our Department of Justice has been weaponized and deployed for revenge and attack of political enemies. All of this directed by a president and a subservient political party who are now turning attention to gerrymandering and undermining free and fair elections with an aim to hold on to power no matter what. Attacks on freedom of speech, taking control of universities, militarizing cities, scapegoating vulnerable communities, weakening democratic institutions, and sowing distrust in elections. These practices are all out of the authoritarian playbook that is being followed in other countries around the world and which is now being followed in this country. We live in a global context in which authoritarianism is on the rise and democracy is in retreat. America has been listed for several years as a backsliding democracy, and we are now in free fall. Authoritarianism in America is on the march, and given sanction by faith leaders who see their chance to replace our diverse democracy with the long-awaited dream of a theocracy that they will build in their own image. America's current crisis of authoritarianism can only be fully understood through the lens of the malignant tradition now described as white Christian nationalism. I mentioned the history of white pastors preaching in support of slavery, and that's just one example of white Christian nationalism. Yet this stained strain of Christianity has been with us since our founding, rooted in the ideals of white supremacy. Xenophobia, misogyny manifest destiny, and the demonstrably false claim that America was founded as a Christian nation and that Christians hold a privileged class in this country. Project 2025 was built upon a vision of Christian nationalism. and the attacks on our civil society are rooted in the idea that this select group of white Christians with their narrow and unpopular beliefs can impose their theocratic will on the rest of the population. The Christian nationalist movement has been fueled for decades by a Christian right-wing echo chamber with the message that Christians are the main group that have suffered persecution in America, and that the grievance they have, which they've lost control of the country that they believe is theirs to govern. They found their champion in Donald Trump, who fully embraced the idea that he, of all people, was God's candidate, and explicitly promised revenge. Revenge. He said that explicitly. Since the inauguration, he has set about fulfilling that promise of revenge. He launched the absurd anti-Christian bias task force, an effort claiming to root out the oppression of Christians in America, but actually intended to suppress viewpoints that don't strictly adhere to the orthodoxy of their own Christian nationalist agenda. The administration has also launched a religious freedom commission made up of exclusively right-wing Christians with one token Orthodox Jew. Likewise, they have launched inquiries against religious NGOs that have supported the work with immigrants and refugees, using the office of the Oversight Committee in Congress to intimidate religious groups just for fulfilling the mission of their faith. Christian nationalists are attempting to employ the full power of local, state, and federal government to enforce their vision of a theocracy, all of this undergirded by the blasphemous rhetoric from the president's mouth that if you are against him and his people, you are against God. Religion is often the handmaiden of dictators, giving up religious autonomy for proximity to power. In countries like Brazil, Russia, and Hungary, to name a few, religion has played a critical role in elevating and consolidating power for autocrats, giving divine legitimacy to their consolidation of power. However, there are also many examples of religious leaders, religious communities, and religious ideas emerging at the vanguard of democracy movements, being critical components of struggles for freedom from tyrants and oppressive regimes. The same is absolutely true here. As I mentioned at the beginning of this thus far thoroughly depressing talk, we are at an inflection point. And what we will all do in the next 6 to 12 months will make the difference between whether we turn our nation back towards the arc of justice and an expanding democracy, or succumb to an authoritarian America in which we will all require to bend the knee to a president who would be king. The good news is that people of diverse faiths and beliefs have been among those who have already shown the courage to meet this moment. Even as some law firms, universities, media companies, and corporations have capitulated to the intimidation from the administration, religious leaders are demonstrating an inspiring moral power and an enduring resilience. The Episcopal Bishop, Marion Buddy, embodied this courage. The moment requires when she simply yet boldly asks for mercy from her pulpit on the day of the inauguration for vulnerable communities such as immigrants and trans youth. The backlash against her was swift, including demands for an apology from the president on Truth Social, and resolutions for censure introduced into Congress, and yet she never backed down. In the face of revoking of the sensitive locations policy that protected houses of worship from being targeted by ICE, the Cooperative Baptists, Sikhs, and Quakers filed a joint lawsuit to restrain the attacks on the members of their congregations, and many other religious groups have since followed suit. When Vice President J.D. Vance, who apparently thinks he's more Catholic than the popes, accused the Catholic Church publicly of padding their bottom line as a way of attacking their work with immigrants. Pope Francis himself wrote a letter that shut that down. Pope Leo has been even more clear that this work will continue under his leadership, and Catholic bishops and nuns and priests have been the most effective protection against ICE abducting lawful immigrants who are simply showing up for their legally required check-ins at immigration offices. When that paragon of virtue, Elon Musk, attacked Lutheran services on his social media account, who provide assistance to rural communities and the elderly, accusing them of money laundering, the Lutheran bishops clapped back by explicitly naming the toxic Christian nationalism pervasive in the administration. During the occupations of Los Angeles, D.C., and now Chicago, faith leaders have shown up on the front lines. Perhaps you have all seen the image of the Reverend David Black of First Presbyterian Church of Chicago, who, while praying, was shot with a pepper spray ball by ICE agents who laughed as he fell. He is not alone. And across the country, there are literally thousands of faith leaders showing up and offering spiritual support, as well as using their religious status as a shield for vulnerable communities. Many of them are being shot at, arrested, and put in handcuffs for expressing their religious convictions. My organization, Interfaith Alliance, submitted an amicus brief in the case Newsom v. Trump, declaring the constitutional right to religious freedom that was being expressed by those clergy who showed up in protest of military occupation. After Target, Walmart, and other companies capitulated and abandoned their commitment to such radical ideas as diversity, equity, and inclusion because of threats from Trump, Black church congregations and Muslim groups led an effective boycott effort and even marched on Wall Street. And let's just say capitulating to Trump has not been good for Target's business. Jewish groups, including the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, Nexus, Trua, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, have made clear that the administration's approach to anti-Semitism that includes attacking universities will actually undercut the freedoms of expression, civil liberties, and democracy itself that have been so instrumental and important principles that have protected Jewish well-being in America. Faith leaders are showing up outside concentration camps, being constructed to hold immigrants, and holding prayer vigils. And religious leaders are being arrested as they resist the painting over of murals and crosswalk that celebrate the diversity of our communities. In response to the formation of the ridiculous anti-Christian bias task force, Interfaith Alliance organized a letter inviting 26 of the most influential Christians in America to call out the shameful sham. And we have just sued the government to find out how it is being weaponized, recognizing that anti-Christian bias does happen in places around the world. It does not happen here. We have similarly rallied religious and civic groups against the misnamed Religious Freedom Commission, which should be renamed Religious Freedom for Me, not for Thee. Perhaps the most important work that I and Interfaith Alliance have been doing has been reinforcing the narrative framework that helps the American people truly understand that this administration is bad for religion and bad for religious people. By embracing Christian nationalism, the administration has betrayed the commitment to religious freedom found in the First Amendment's non-establishment clause that prohibits any state religion. We are calling out the relentless attacks against faith communities, any faith community that is not in lockstep with their political goals. We are sending up a flare to the media, politicians, and faith communities. The threat to religion is indeed coming from inside the House, the White House. Unfortunately, I fear the worst is yet to come. Already, Project 2025 is entrenched in many states across the country, and by some calculations, fully half of the destructive aims of Project 2025 have already been fulfilled. Cruelty, callousness, and almost frenetic sense of destiny is the hallmark of this administration, and the Christian nationalists who are supporting it. The wave of authoritarianism is cresting in America needs the moral courage and the organizational power of our faith communities. Now is the time for the pro-democracy faith movement to show up in force. The good news is that this president and his administration's policies are not popular. And the religious actions and aims and rhetoric of the authoritarian administration reveals their weakness. In aligning with the most extreme wing of Christianity, they have alienated the majority of religious Americans who are committed to an America where all have equality and dignity. There is an emerging and growing pro-democracy interfaith movement made up of people of diverse backgrounds and beliefs who understand the urgency of confronting authoritarianism of our moment and are summoning the courage and spiritual power to meet it. Skye Perryman is the president of Democracy Forward, which is the organization that has been leading the legal defense of our democracy, successfully litigating against the gross overreaches of this administration. And she has stated, courage is the new currency. And she affirmed early on that of all the groups that Democracy Forward is representing, the religious groups are among the most courageous. Courage is needed right now, and all of us are capable of it. I don't believe that anyone is born with more or less courage than anyone else. Rather, courage is a practice that is cultivated, a spiritual discipline that we can grow. The root of the word courage is the Latin word cor, which means heart. Courage is an act of the heart. Courage is an act of love. And if courage is indeed the new currency, then I submit to those of us who are involved in theological education and formation to consider the way that we can be mints of the currency of courage and then spend it lavishly on our democracy. For the remainder of my time, I'd like to suggest 3 principles of courage available to diverse faith communities and to the broader pro-democracy interfaith movement. These 3 principles of courage have been present every time faith in America has shown up to move our country forward and to pass the test. The first principle of courage is to go deep. Consider what that means to you. Each of our faith traditions offers a deep well of spiritual power. Showing up, speaking out, and reaching out to hold our communities together takes a deep toll. Many of us are losing friends and have loved ones who are vulnerable and frightened. Some of us feel the target on our own backs. Others of us are dealing with the heartbreak that comes from the daily news of attacks on our democracy. The interfaith movement can most successfully access courage by reminding people to call upon the spiritual resources within their own tradition. I am a Christian, and in my tradition, Jesus invites his followers to love God with our heart and our soul and our mind. I understand this as an invitation to cultivate that personal spirituality and connection that we carry into the world. The mandate to love God is an invitation to intentionally seek out and dwell in that deep place of fire inside where life emanates, where our deepest truth dwells, and where we feel that connection to God and to all the world. Cultivating that spiritual power is critical for sustaining the courage required for this moment. A great inspiration within the Christian tradition is the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman. Dr. Thurman was born in 1899 and raised by his formerly enslaved grandmother. He became a Baptist preacher and served as Dean of the Chapel at Howard University and Dean of the Chapel at Boston University. Thurman was introduced to Mahatma Gandhi in 1936, and they were important inspirations for one another. Thurman was especially captivated by the principle of ahimsa, the term for nonviolence that Thurman wrote about in his seminal book, Jesus and the Disinherited, in which he connected the spiritual practice of nonviolence with the power of love. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a graduate student at Boston University when Howard Thurman was Dean of the Chapel, and was enormously influenced by Thurman, and was said to have carried a copy of Jesus and the Disinherited in his pocket during the Montgomery bus boycott. Howard Thurman was both a prophet and a mystic who went deep into the spiritual reservoirs of his faith and connected it to courage. In his book, Deep is the Hunger, Thurman wrote, "There is a quiet courage that comes from an inward spring of confidence in the meaning and significance of life. Such courage is an underground river, flowing far beneath the shifting events of one's experience, keeping alive 1,000 little springs of action." The Reverend Dr. King also wrote about courage, writing, "Courage is an inner resolution to go forward despite obstacles. Cowardice is submissive surrender to circumstances. Courage breeds creativity." Thurman and King are just two examples of the women and men who called upon the deep spiritual well that sustained the civil rights movement, and which has been present every time religious people showed up to move our country forward. We need that spiritual power for ourselves. People of faith must hold close the spiritual power of whatever tradition you have, including scripture, prayers, meditations, and especially music. We have access to the same spirit that our elders did before us. Make space and time to go deep, and let it sustain us for the long road ahead. Turn and turn again to the divine, the ultimate source of our courage. The second principle of courage is to go wide. What does that mean to you? There is a familiar and true saying, courage is contagious. Courage is best and perhaps only exercised in community. And community is a defining characteristic of religion. Nobody is religious alone. The Latin word religio means that which binds us and connects us to the divine, but also to one another. Many religious and spiritual communities have baked in assets for this moment, such as networks of people, schedules for coming together, systems for disseminating information, and even buildings where meetings can be held. Equally important are the regular sermons, prayer meetings, liturgies, and meditation that bring people together and inspire and sustain communities and reinforce the moral clarity for meeting this moment. Most, if not all, communities of diverse faiths and beliefs hold on to some version of the mandate to love our neighbor, or the golden rule. This principle of reaching out and caring for those around us can be a starting point for reflection and a springboard for action. Let's ask ourselves, what does it mean to love our neighbor in this time in America? And include the corollary question of who do we include in our definition of neighbor? We can have these discussions within our own communities, as well as using these questions as an opportunity to be open, curious, and engage with people and communities different from our own. Our moment is hitting individuals and communities very differently. But what is true is that authoritarianism thrives when people feel alone, isolated, and suspicious of one another. Practicing the golden rule, our faith communities can offer the antidote and create wider communities across differences. This includes the complex work of interfaith solidarity. I have been involved in interfaith work for the last 30 years. And this is the most challenging time I have known. There are very real disagreements about issues that impact our communities both domestically and internationally. We can and must be honest with one another. But it is so important to maintain connection and to recognize there is a tactic of authoritarian regimes to pit groups, particularly minority groups, against one another. Interfaith Alliance is investing in a project called Reimagining Interfaith that offers interfaith frameworks and trainings tailored to this moment. We are also supporting projects that are fostering trust and hopeful conversations between leaders of Muslim and Jewish groups who are coming together because they both see the urgent threat of our time and want to join forces with the wider pro-democracy faith movement to meet it. Learning new skills on how to love our neighbor brings me to one of the most important suggestions that I am putting forward. Our faith communities and theological seminaries should be places where training in organizing and especially nonviolent resistance are offered. We need our people in the streets to show up and speak out in a way that is effective while keeping individuals and communities safe. I had the great honor of interviewing Representative Reverend John Lewis about his life of faith and service. He reminded me that nobody took part in the civil rights demonstrations who had not gone through training in nonviolent tactics. These training sessions are deeply rooted in spiritual principles and the discipline of our faith and connect us also to previous struggles. Now, not all of us will feel called to the front lines of protest, yet knowledge is power, and the faithful should feel that we have the spiritual power to show up and publicly declare our commitment to our faith, to our love of neighbor, and our determination to preserve our democracy. As the president of Interfaith Alliance, I had the honor of serving on the steering committee of the No Kings demonstrations last June and more recently on October 18th. The leaders of Move On and Indivisible and all the other civic organizations were so grateful for the people of faith who were showing up and present, and also the specific role that people of faith had in making those demonstrations some of the largest and safest in U.S. history. We will continue these and other opportunities to show up. A statistic frequently offered is that it takes 3.5% of the population to show up in nonviolent protests to fight back against authoritarianism. We are getting close. Getting trained up will make all of us feel powerful and ready to meet the moment with courage. I don't know about you, but so many people come up to me and ask, what can I do? Interfaith Alliance has seen explosive growth with 300% increase in our affiliate network with new partners in places like Idaho, Alabama, Kentucky, West Virginia is our most recent one. We have a massive influx of people showing up for our programs, both in person and online, as well as deepening partnerships with legacy civic groups like the American Library Association and the League of Women Voters. We are finding one another across faith differences and showing up for our communities. And now we are turning our attention to preparing for the 2026 elections to protect our democracy and make sure that those elections happen and that people are free to vote without intimidation. This movement requires us to go wide with the courage to love our neighbors and our demos, the people of our democracy. The final principle of courage is to go far. for you to think about that for a second. Courage is best maintained when thought of as a constant stream rather than a flash in the pan. As Sky Perryman told me on my podcast, The State of Belief, there is no way out of this but through it. There will be no miracle turnaround, but rather a holding fast to our moral principles and holding the line on democracy for the long term. The pro-democracy interfaith movement should in part understand ourselves as communities who hold a vision for the future that not only withstands the attack of authoritarianism in this moment, also projects a future of democracy that will continue to draw us forward and inspire us. A colleague, Maria Stefan from the Horizons Project, is an expert in democracy preservation. Stefan, who's a great partner for Interfaith Alliance, has explained that religious groups have played a critical role in the majority of the successful efforts to overcome authoritarian rule in the past 100 years. As mentioned above, religious and spiritual communities in these movements use their moral authority to speak up, leverage their congregational networks, to bring people together and mobilize them for action with a sense of divine purpose. But Stefan also emphasized the role faith communities can play in imagining a future. She explained, quote, religious beliefs offer transformative visions, messages of hope, and a sense that victory is inevitable, which sustains nonviolent struggles in the face of repression. She went on, autocrats want us to believe that resistance is futile, and we are powerless to change things. This is where we need hope that we can win, which faith, grounded in spiritual practice, can provide us. I think of the soaring words of Dr. King, who in the face of incredible violence and hate, insisted on dreaming of a day where all people might be equal, and inspired a generation of activists to keep their eyes on the prize of justice and freedom. All of King's work can be understood as striving for what Jesus described as the kingdom of God, or the beloved community established on earth as in heaven. King, along with the women and men of all different walks of life and faith traditions, kept moving forward, guided by this vision where all people might come together in a democracy that was truly just and were all treated with dignity and respect. It was a vision that invited diverse coalitions of people marching together towards freedom. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, as he marched alongside King, I felt my feet were praying. Together they marched, compelled by a vision to go far. Even as the White House is being literally demolished to make way for a ballroom for billionaires, we can go far by holding on to a vision for the future when the White House becomes the people's house and America lives into the promise out of many one with liberty and justice for all. I end with a question to you who are leaders in the formation of new religious leaders. When they tell the story of our time, how will they describe our actions and the way our religion inspired us? I pray that we and the people we are responsible for and to might together go deep, go wide, and go far, and pass the test that is ours. You and I, we the people together, will embody the sacred promise of the democracy we long for. It is up to us. May God grant us wisdom and courage for the living of these days. Thank you very much for your attention.